Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. Continuing on with yesterday's discussion of abortion and the shifting landscape after the Dobbs decision, I want to talk about an article from The Hill. This one touches on the topic of IVF. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. I have several friends who have struggled to have children of their own. There's a misnomer. I have several friends who have struggled to have children of their own, and IVF is often seen as a miracle. It's wonderful. I think this is exactly why Roe v. Wade needed to be overturned, because IVF is a little controversial if you really look at the nuts and bolts of how it operates. And we haven't had a chance to discuss these very sensitive, very important topics as a culture, as a political, and as a country, and as states, since Roe v. Wade basically overrode and froze that ongoing discussion in the 70s. Since Roe v. Wade effectively froze that conversation in the 70s. So we've got to work through some stuff. The world has changed in the last 50 years, and we need to figure out exactly where our lines are morally as a people. Now, as is often the case in politics, whenever you have a group that's been out of power or in the minority or hasn't had a chance to express their thoughts, you give them the floor, and sometimes they tend to overreach. As an example, in Florida, I like many of the things that Ron DeSantis does in Florida, one of them being the parental rights and education bill. Or no, not that one. I hate that I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it. The Don't Say Gay bill. I forget the exact name of the legislation. But that legislation basically said, listen, don't talk about sex to kids 8 and under. It's not appropriate. And I wholeheartedly support that. And then, after successfully putting that into place, the legislature and Ron DeSantis go further and say, well, now don't talk about it, to 12-year-olds, to 15-year-olds, to 18-year-olds. Just don't even bring it up in public school. That's a little less of a slam dunk for me. We're all developing. Kids are going to have questions. Kids are going to be needing to grapple with these things. So I can't say that we should rule out that conversation entirely. A 5-year-old doesn't need to know about hormone replacement or drag queens or any of that other nonsense. But a 15-year-old should probably have that conversation. But once you kind of get a chance to get a little steam under you, sometimes you go too far. And over time, that wisdom, the wisdom of kind of the system, is that over time, those extremes correct back to a median. So let's dive into this article, and then you'll see where I'm coming from. From The Hill, Hillary Clinton, of all people, is warning about the legality of birth control in the wake of a decision by the Alabama Supreme Court that found frozen embryos created through fertility treatments are children under state law. For a 2-second diversion into the technical details of IVF, effectively, a woman is given very powerful drugs that cause her to ovulate and produce far more eggs than she normally would during her normal cycle. Those eggs are harvested. Sperm is harvested from the man, probably a little bit of an easier process. And then a clinician effectively artificially creates embryos, artificially creates, essentially, conception occurs in the lab, where these unfertilized eggs become fertilized, become embryos, become viable human beings, effectively, because the process of conception is where you take the gametes from a male and a female. Again, one of the virtues of the whole transgenderism argument is it makes sense to just use the medical terminology. There is male and female in this process because that's how you make babies. So you take the gametes from a male and a female, you combine them, and now you have a unique genetic code, and you have a viable embryo that, if implanted in a woman, would become a human being, assuming all the natural processes occur from that point. We now have, in the case of an IVF treatment, there's typically there's a high failure rate when it comes to then the artificial implantation, and so they'll go in bulk. They'll put in 8, 10, 20 eggs because they're hoping to get one viable baby out of it. They don't know which one's going to take. They don't know how it's going to. So basically they say some of these embryos aren't going to make it, but if we end up with a baby where we otherwise wouldn't have had a baby, that is an unalloyed good. Again, like I said, it's a miracle. It's wonderful. Babies are great. But you have to ask the question, if your moral position is that a fertilized egg from the moment of conception is a human being, you're ending the life of a human being if you're careless with how those embryos are treated. Medical science is kind of limited in its perspective on this. This is really less of a science conversation and more of a theological conversation, which always goes well when you put it into politics. They came for so now I'm basically just trying to make the point. This is a thorny issue with people who care deeply on multiple sides of this topic, and where there's not a clear cut, it's not as clear cut as you might want it to be. Sometimes the pros and cons are really easy to draw out. Sometimes they're a little tougher to tease out. I think the best way to do that is through open, vibrant, ongoing communication that may result in a state here or there overreaching. But over time, I expect it'll be pulled back. So let's see how it goes. Because the left is losing their mind, apparently, over this. After all, if Hillary Clinton's warning about it, then they must be serious. They came for abortion first. Now it's in vitro fertilization. And next it'll be birth control. The 2016 Democratic presidential nominee and Secretary of State said in a post on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. The extreme right won't stop trying to exert government control over our most sacred personal decisions until we codify reproductive freedom as a human right. So I don't agree with Hillary Clinton on almost anything, but I can agree with her on this. It is a far better solution than a Supreme Court decision to pass legislation that reflects the actual will of the people. And it sounds like what she's saying is that she wants the opposite of what we talked about yesterday, a national abortion ban. She wants the federal government to pass a law that makes abortion legal on all 50 states as a matter of federal law. I applaud that effort because that's using the actual constitutional framework to allow the people to express their political will. Even if I disagree with the end result of what she's aiming for, she's at least advocating something that plays within the bounds of the Constitution. Good for her. Most of the time, she's not that fussed. But I appreciate that she's advocating for the legislature to do its job. The University of Alabama and the health system has decided to pause IVF treatments because the simple truth is they don't want to expose themselves to liability. The Supreme Court has ruled and said in Alabama and said fertilized embryos are babies. They're a human child. Understand that weight when you're dealing with that, because you could make yourself vulnerable to prosecution. So Chief Justice Tom Parker in Alabama, even before birth, all human beings have the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory. We believe that each human being, from the moment of conception, is made in the image of God, created by him to reflect his likeness. That's a theological argument. And you know what? More power to him. He's the Chief Justice. He's in Alabama. Alabama is very Christian. that's how they want to roll. It's not much of a legal argument, but I'm sure there was more in there too. Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra decried the court's decision, saying it will have heart-wrenching consequences for women and their families. I've long made it clear that overturning Roe was just the beginning of the attacks on women's health, privacy, and autonomy, and that's exactly what we continue to see. And then, of course, they have to bring Nikki Haley into this for some reason, saying she agreed an embryo was an unborn baby, but then added in an interview, we need to treat these issues with the utmost respect. Nikki Haley, being a fence-sitting, what is it, Dick Cheney in heels? Yeah, I'll go with that. A fence-sitting Republican. She's trying to ride the line on the abortion. She doesn't want to get tagged by one side or the other. She doesn't want to get kicked from both sides. So she's basically trying to say, all you pro-abortion people, I hear you. All you anti-abortion people, I hear you. Somehow I want to be friends with both of you. You can't be friends with both sides in this particular conversation. It's a challenge. So what are we left with? I can't say I hate the Alabama court's decision. And that's going to have potentially impactful issue with people who want to have a baby. People who want to have a baby more than anything else in the world. But you know what's a great solution for families that can't have children of their own? Adoption. Instead of aborting babies, if we put them up for adoption, then the people who can't have children, instead of pursuing IVF, could adopt the baby. This seems like a win-win. Just an idea. Just throwing that out there. But on another layer, separate and aside from this particular decision, which I'm not sure is going to stick, it seems likely it will end up being untenable. I think they're going to end up needing to pull back on that. But we'll see where the conversation goes. We're able to have this conversation, so we can actually have progress here, which is good. But on another layer, you often see this on the left, where I guess on the right too, although on different issues, where they say, hey, this particular policy decision you may be fine with, but look what's coming down the line. They're coming after birth control. Okay, cards on the table. When my wife and I were first married, we used birth control all the time because we were young and stupid and trying to figure out how to be married. We didn't want to throw kids in that mix. We'd probably end up killing each other. So it took us several years before we decided we were ready to have kids. Birth control is fantastic. In that context, I think that's totally reasonable. Again, it's my decision, so of course I think it's reasonable. The challenge with the left is that they often use verbiage that causes you to take your own thoughts and your own feelings and put them out and apply them to what's being said in a way that's not factually consistent. So as an example, if you have something that prevents conception, okay, we'll just go with the simple low-tech option. If you have a condom, okay, you're preventing conception, generally speaking. That is technically a form of birth control. That is something that you could say, wait, Hillary Clinton is saying they're coming after, they're going to make condoms illegal? No one in the world is arguing to make condoms illegal. And by condoms, that's a general catch-all that we're using for all types of birth control that prevent or limit the chance of conception. The only 100% effective form of birth control is abstinence. Just throwing that out there. So if you're looking at all these methods that mitigate the risk of conception, I don't know anyone, left or right, that is seriously advocating that we eliminate those forms of birth control. However, and this is where the left gets tricky, where they're technically correct, but they're misleading. There are forms of medicine and intervention that are called birth control that are, for lack of a better term, the morning after pill, the Plan B pill, etc. In other words, there are medicines that target preventing implantation of a fertilized embryo after conception. So you have sex, the egg is fertilized. It takes several days, sometimes a week, before it's implanted in the uterine lining and begins to develop truly as a baby. There are medicines that interfere with that process. And if you take the position, which I think is a morally consistent position, although it is probably untenable in the modern world, that a fertilized embryo is a human life, then you probably want to ban the medication that could affect that phase between conception and implantation. Most likely, that's what Hillary Clinton is referring to. That's not the same, that is a categorically, that's a different thing. But the left wants to scare you into thinking that they're going to ban condoms and all similar mechanisms. It's arguing in bad faith. Similarly, the left tries to make this an issue about bodily autonomy, privacy, human freedom, because these are topics that echo strongly with people on the right. And what I think is hilarious is Hillary Clinton is warning about the government control over human decisions. The extreme right won't stop trying to exert government control over our most sacred personal decisions. She's totally okay with the government controlling personal human decisions if they agree with her agenda. But if not, she's suddenly a small government. Wait, what? No, this is Hillary Clinton. Oh dear. But if it's convenient, then that's the message we're going to take. And then lastly, the point made by the HHS secretary. Overturning Roe was just the beginning of the attacks on women's health, privacy, and autonomy. This is a framing that is designed, I think, in bad faith to confuse the issue. It's a little bit like, it's a bad analogy, but we'll go with it. We talked the other day about how the left is making the issue on immigration, saying that immigrants actually commit crime at a very low rate, without bothering to draw the distinction between legal and illegal immigration. And that from a legal perspective, every single illegal entrant into the United States is in violation of federal law. Therefore, 100% of them are committing crimes. 100% is a pretty high crime rate, okay? There are a lot of people who say, again, this is the old Hillary Clinton standard, they want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare, okay? Well, legal and rare you can talk about. Safe is impossible because 100% of abortions murder the child. Safe for who? Now, it's possible that you can make decisions that make abortion less likely to interfere with the life of the soon-to-be mother, but it is impossible to design abortions that are safe for the baby. It's a definitional problem. You cannot design a system whereby illegal entrants aren't committing crimes because the moment they came in, they committed a crime. Everything after that, they've already committed crimes. You can't reduce criminality past that point. They're trying to frame this as only look at the mother, only look at the adults, or in some unfortunate circumstances, the minor. Only look at the woman who might be affected by this. Don't pay attention to the other life in the equation. While people who are pro-life are making the argument saying, you're forgetting that there's more than one life at stake here. There's more than one life to consider. When you are weighing the rights of the people involved, it's not just the father, it's not just the mother, it's not just the adults in the room who can speak for themselves. It is also the life that is unable to defend itself, unable to speak for itself. That needs to be advocated for as well. That needs to be defended. It's kind of one of the purposes of government. We go back to that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness thing. So, specious argumentation, out of context quotes, very lefty. It's the Hill. What are you going to do? This is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. Good luck out there.